Intel's not allowed to sell to them. Also, they made it really confusing what is going on with their CPUs, and it doesn't matter because AMD's taking all the market share. Let's get in the hot news, everybody. I'm your Brett host. We're going to be going over the hottest tech news that can find on the internet while you enjoy your breakfast this Thursday, May 9th, 2024. And we're going to start off today talking about a little oopsie doopsie that's hitting both Intel and Qualcomm, and that is they're no longer allowed to sell chips over to Huawei in China. This is coming after Huawei was banned from receiving American chips back in 2019. There were some exceptions that were left for Intel and Qualcomm in order to make those, and the US just came out and said that they continuously assess how our controls can best protect our national security and foreign policy interests, taking into consideration a constantly changing threat environment and technological landscape. As part of this process, as we have done in the past, we sometimes revoke export licenses. So this happened, and Intel has advised their shareholders that, hey, this is gonna lose us a little bit of money, so we're expecting to earn a little bit less than we were otherwise expecting. Initially, it was $12.5 to $13.5 billion in the second quarter, and now it might be a little bit below $13 billion. It's not necessarily going to be great for us because of the US taking this money away. It's really not clear how many chips Intel was selling to Huawei in order to get their laptops and various different PC products out the door, but it does appear to be a continuing stance that the US government is taking towards tech that is being shipped over to China. Nvidia has been famously going back and forth with the US government in terms of what it can export and what it can't, and now Intel looks like they're getting a little bit of that, as well as Qualcomm, which it makes sense, especially as they're gearing up to launch Lunar Lake as well as Snapdragon X Elite, which are both supposed to be higher end AI processing things. They got 45 tops in those bad boys. They can do so many trillions operations per second of AI that it'll make your head spin, and I think it's clear that the current administration's general foreign policy when it comes to AI tech is do not give China the hardware. We will make sure that doesn't happen. But one of the things that Microsoft and kind of the tech world at large has been allowing to happen for the last little bit is us talking about our RAM wrong. RAM wrong.
RAM right. RAM left.
One of the ways that we've been talking about DDR RAM for the last little bit is just discussing how many megahertz it has. I got DDR4 3600 megahertz. Well, I got DDR5 8000. Well, it turns out that all of that is wrong because technically it's half the amount of megahertz. You can see that if you go anywhere into like CPU-Z or just evaluate what your RAM speed actually is, and that's because it's double data rate. What you're actually getting is 3600 mega transfers per second. Your RAM is actually only 1800 megahertz, but because it's double data rate and not single data rate, you're getting extra. And so Microsoft is now fixing Task Manager to start saying mega transfers per second instead of megahertz. If you go into Task Manager right now, bet you it tells you how much it hurts. And now if you update Windows 11, it's going to tell you how much you transfer. It's good stuff. And I want to transfer this episode of Hot News over to Reece because I love him so much it hurts.
Yo, welcome back to UFD Deals, bringing the hottest tech deals out on the internet. Hope you guys are doing well, and what the heck, it's Thursday already. I don't know where the time goes, but hey, we've got some deals. Starting off with the Razer Orochi V2 lightweight wireless gaming mouse for only $44.99, making it $25 off. But then next up we have the Fractal Design Mesh Fight 2 mid-tower ATX case, available in black for only $109.99, making it $50 off. But then lastly we have this LG 34-inch 3440 by 1440 240Hz curved OLED gaming monitor for only $896.99, making it $403 off. And hey, with that, the deals are done. You can find these and more linked in the video description down below. But until next time, I'm gonna hand you off back to Brad for the rest of your hot news. Cheers.
Well, Reece, this is an ordeal when it comes to Intel and everything that's going on with the 13th and 14th gen CPUs. I want to spell this out for you as clearly as I possibly can, which is not at all. Because we discussed earlier in the week that Intel released a memo to motherboard manufacturers that they need to be limiting their power profiles down to 188 watts. It's too much to have it at 253, despite the fact that that's exactly what the CPUs need. However, that message was directed at motherboard manufacturers. So Intel has come out with their consumer-facing statement, the one that applies to both you and I, not the companies who make the BIOSes, and it's so confusing. I don't exactly know what's going on anymore. So you can see here on this AnonTech article that they say Intel recommends Intel default settings. But if you go over to this PC Gamer article, it says no, Intel isn't recommending baseline power profiles to fix crashing CPUs. Which one is it? I don't know. Well-respected tech journalists from many different outlets are reading what Intel is saying, and there's no clear conclusion as to exactly what's happening here. So to put it into perspective, the last message we talked about, again, was directed at the companies making the BIOSes. This one was not exactly directed at consumers. This was sent out to tech media as like a statement that Intel is gonna give to consumers. And let me just read it for you, saying several motherboard manufacturers have released BIOS profiles labeled Intel Baseline Profile. However, these BIOS profiles are not the same as the Intel default settings. Recommendations that Intel has recently shared with its partners regarding the instability issues reported on 13th and 14th Gen Q processors. So that makes sense. We've talked about this. What has been coming out from these motherboard manufacturers is not the exact same as what Intel told everybody to do. That's what happened earlier this week. Hey, 253 watts, too much. That's not Intel default settings. It needs to be 188. That part's clear. But then they go on saying these Intel Baseline Profile BIOS settings appear to be based on power delivery guidance previously provided by Intel to manufacturers describing the various power delivery options for 13th and 14th generation Q processors based on motherboard capability. Intel is not recommending motherboard manufacturers to use baseline power delivery settings on boards capable of higher values. Intel recommends Intel default settings are a combination of thermal and power delivery features along with a selection of possible power delivery profiles based on motherboard capabilities. Intel recommends customers to implement the highest power delivery profile compatible with each individual motherboard design as noted in the table below, which this is gonna be very confusing to the average consumer who bought a 14900K from a pre-build over at freaking Main Gear. So that is as clear as mud. They're essentially saying if your motherboard is capable of doing more than the 188 watts, you should run it at that. So the baseline power delivery profiles that they're gonna be implementing on these motherboard BIOSes aren't to be used with the 13900K and the 14900K, because if you bought those overclocking CPUs, you bought a motherboard that's capable of delivering more than 188 watts of power. You bought a motherboard that likely can do 320, 400, some of them could go even higher than that, especially ones that they used for liquid nitrogen. But that doesn't help anything. Intel's default settings are reducing the power to get the CPU stable, but Intel's saying don't do that if you have a more capable motherboard, despite the fact that that is the exact situation that is causing these CPUs to be unstable. I have tried to find out exactly what's going on here. I've read many different journalists' interpretations of what Intel's trying to say, and they are literally talking in circles right now. We're giving out this Intel default profile because many people said that we had to do this. Many people requested this, but don't use it if your motherboard's capable. They don't mention anything about whether or not the CPU is unstable. It should actually help to limit it if you go to a 188 watt profile. But if Intel came out specifically and told you, the consumer, hey, this 14900K that you've been running at 400 watts, yeah, run it at under half that, okay? That's what we need you to do. That would be horrible for them PR-wise. So it's very weird. They're dancing around a weird situation. If you have a way to synthesize both of these statements in a way that's cohesive and makes sense from an angle that I'm not seeing or other tech journalists aren't seeing, please let me know, because it looks like Intel is saying one thing to motherboard manufacturers, hey, the problem is you guys, you're pushing these CPUs too hard. And then when they're coming out to the customer, they're saying, hey, if your motherboard's fine, you're fine. Just keep going. This is a bad response. It is unclear, and it also doesn't help the average consumer. Like somebody like me, I can read through that power table and understand what settings I'm supposed to change. I can dig through the advanced settings on the BIOS. It'll be totally fine. I'm the two-time back-to-back South Africa amateur overclocker champion. And I was the #1 amateur overclocker in the world in 2016. I've got my bases covered on that front, but the average person, they're not going to be able to decipher exactly what they're supposed to do and potentially could even do some damage. So Intel, be clearer. Have some communication that tells the customer what to do, even, hear me out, if it's at the sacrifice of your public image right now. Because guess what? You're gonna get people to trust you later on. But if all you're gonna do is talk around in circles, give people different communications depending on what you get from each one of them, well, then you're going to ruin your reputation moving forward. Have clear, precise communications about what the problem is, why it's happening, how you're going to fix it, and how you're gonna prevent it from happening again. It's a standard apology. very simple to do. I understand when you have a corporate structure where you got to get 60,000 different approvals to say one specific thing publicly, it makes it very difficult, but that is the way the consumer ends up trusting you again. Doing stuff like this is not going to help. And let me put some numbers to back that up, because reports are coming out from Mercury Research showing that AMD is hitting record numbers. They are moving fast and furious, getting into everybody's system. So this is the latest numbers for the x86 CPU market, which is just basically AMD and Intel competing for those numbers. And what has happened is AMD has continued to grow past previous highs. They're up year over year, they're up quarter over quarter. And if we take a look, their desktop CPU market share is at 24%. That is the highest that they have been in a considerable amount of time. The last time they were over 20% was back in Q3 of 2021. That was Ryzen 3000, and what we're seeing here is Ryzen 7000 is just absolutely putting them into the hands of many different people who actually want to have CPUs that they can trust and that they know is going to consume power responsibly. They've also seen a slight decrease quarter over quarter in the mobility sector. That makes a lot of sense. They don't really have a whole lot to offer on that front, but we do have Strix Point potentially coming out at Computex with that stupid naming of Ryzen AI 9 freaking HX 170. I don't know if that's going to help or hurt their market share, but that should definitely get more options out on the market for people to buy AMD. And then on the server side of things, they're also looking pretty good. 23.6% market share, which is consistent with where they've been for about the last year. So good numbers coming out from AMD. Zen 4 appears to be a very strong showing for them. We're expecting to get Zen 5 very soon. Intel doesn't have a whole lot of response, and currently what's going on in the current market is just an absolute crap show. Communication is bad, it's confusing, and AMD is just the victor of all of it. They are watching Intel lose to themselves at this current time. And I watch you guys lose yourself in the words that you type. That was weird. I'm sorry for that segue, but let's get into comment response. Box420 says, I'm getting really tired of companies trying to shove AI down everyone's throats. Like, did we really need the Snapchat AI or the Facebook AI that was the search bar, or Microsoft jamming AI into Windows, or putting a watermark up if your PC is not fast enough? I was okay with the Google search one because it's when you're actually looking for information, but holy cow, it's everywhere. You're wrong. You need it. You need AI. If you don't have AI in your life, you're miserable. If you don't have AI in everything that you do, you're a subpar user of computers, okay? If you don't have AI in your freaking latte in the morning, okay, how are you ever gonna survive the robot uprising? You need to start fusing with all of the AI right now. AI, whoa.
What's poppin' tonight?
Thank you. That is foolish discussion by you. How could you possibly think that we don't need AI? To be serious, it is just kind of frustrating because it's everything that's being labeled as AI is all stuff that's mostly been around. Yes, there was breakthrough that happened with large language models and generative AI, but a lot of things that are being described as AI are things that already existed before ChatGPT broke onto the scene, and they were just using machine learning. It was part of their compute stack. It was part of how they built out their software library. Machine learning was just a small part of how they did things. But now everybody's finding out that, hey, if you call it AI, you can get more money. This reminds me of when Long Island Iced Tea changed their name to be Long Island Blockchain back in 2018. We did a video on that. Also, Kodak coin. Do you guys remember Kodak had a cryptocurrency? We're in the exact same situation, except for it's not as, how do I put this? It's not as scummy, right? Like, technically, are they using machine learning? Sure. Like, this is an exercise in marketing, whereas when it came to blockchain and the coins, that was an exercise in companies becoming finance companies, like changing their entire structure and like discussing personal finance and like actually implementing technology that didn't help them. They already had ways of handling it. They weren't using blockchain. Blockchain wasn't being implemented into their tech stack. They were just saying it because it was cool. And then we had the whole crypto thing with NFTs, which just, every NFT project all of a sudden also became a game dev and a web dev, and like if you have blockchain experience, you can also make a game console. I separate the crypto thing from the AI thing because when that happened, it was like everybody became a multimodal tech company, which is just not how things work. If you look at most of the projects that were announced in the NFT craze, our NFTs are going to allow us to unlock the next wave of gaming with Web3. It was all hog water and garb wash, and it wasn't like actually part of a business model that made any sense. At least now, like, I can kind of see it. Is it marketing fluff? Yeah, but is it also what they've already been doing just with a new cool buzzword? Also, yeah. So I'm a little bit more tolerant of AI being put everywhere, but I do draw the line at my Ryzen processors. Ryzen AI 9, I'm gonna scream, ah! Then we got Relicus saying, what's up with these terrible CPU naming schemes? They're throwing away perfectly good naming schemes so they can slap words like AI and Ultra in their name, knowing that the average consumer barely knows what a CPU is when buying a computer. At this rate, we're gonna end up with names like Intel Core, Giga Maximus Processor, Super Mega Ultra 11, 9000 HX, or AMD Ryzen Quantum Crypto AIGF 9 HX 170. I'm just waiting for Nvidia to rebrand their cards to the AITX, okay? Forget GTX, GeForce Gaming's dead, RTX Ray Tracing Gaming's dead. It's now AITX. All of your games are AI generated. You don't need realistic ray tracing anymore because the computer's just making up the game as it goes. You have a different game than everybody else. That's what you want, don't you? You want to have everything so personalized to you that you cannot share experiences with anyone anymore. That's what generative AI is going to bring to your next gaming experience. Then we got Wolvie saying, as Marquez from MKBHD said, all of that is great, but still just an iPad. Yeah, the M4 didn't need to go in an iPad, but Apple did it because it just made it so they had more tops than everybody else right now. They could have put an M3 in an iPad and it would have been totally fine. I did see like a couple comments that were like, but Brett, the M4 has that new OLED display engine that allows them to power 2 of the OLED panels at once, that allows them to get the 1000 nits brightness, which is cool and all, but they could have just added that to the M3. It's an M3 plus the OLED engine. They didn't have, like, are we expecting every single device that Apple's going to be making from now on to be an OLED display if it has an M4? I'm not necessarily sure that's happening. It's a waste of silicon on devices that aren't going to have OLED on it, or they're just not going to put the M4 in anything that's not OLED. So then you have CPUs that are divided by the type of panel that a computer has. This is purely a marketing exercise for Apple. Is it a cool little chip? Sure. Is it revolutionary? No. I have also been seeing some rumblings around the internet, which I just kind of want to toss out there. Is that what's happening with Apple and their M chips, their Apple Silicon, isn't the fact that they don't know how to make chips, but rather they quickly ran into the wall of ARM as an architecture, and they can't go further than this because ARM is tapped up. Which I've also heard the exact same thing about x86, and then you got RISC-V people coming in being like, this is the ISA you should use. But the people I'm hearing ARM being a limitation from are people that I tend to trust in the industry, so it's kind of it's intriguing to just keep an eye on. Is Apple done because ARM's done, not because Apple's bad at making chips? Maybe, I don't know. We'll keep an eye on the discussions and movements surrounding that. Now we got Adam McGuire saying, monkey paw shrivels for all the people wanting more Fallout and Elder Scrolls. I'm just sad. I'm sad about the entire Xbox thing. Then we got Rob saying, best hot tech news channel, which the one you don't see, coming in with a great point, saying Riley running TechLinked and UFD Tech Hot News are agreeably the best. I appreciate all of the encouragement and support. I would agree. I love Riley. I think every time I see that man in a video, I'm just filled with delight. I got to meet him at LTX last year. I got to tell him he's my favorite, and he absolutely is. That guy is just... he's wondrous. And then we got Cam saying, part of me wonders if the M4 had the thermal headroom with a MacBook Pro chassis fan, if its tops would be competitive with AMD or not. I don't think that the tops would be better just because it has better cooling, because Apple's just quoting their chip in a best case scenario anyways. Like, they're telling you what it's capable of, not what it's gonna thermal throttle to after you've used it for a little while. And this actually is starting to pop up in some benchmarks. People are doing AI benchmarks on the M3, and there's preliminary benchmarks of the M4 and the iPad, and what they're finding is that it's only a 10% difference, despite the fact that it's supposed to be a 50% gain on the M4 side, and that's because they're using the M3 in a MacBook Pro that has a fan. And so the M4 might have 50% more tops, or 100% more tops, I think is the correct number, but because it has to thermal limit itself, it's not making use of all of those, which again just points to the idea, just fulfilling my bias and worldview and confirmation bias here. This was all done for marketing and not because it's actually needed. You didn't need to put a M4 in an iPad. Then we got Clever Lizard saying, one minor difference in the examples you mentioned in your early access argument is that successful games like Hades, V Rising, Baldur's Gate 3 are indie AA titles, Baldur's Gate 3 being an obvious outlier in that aspect, and at least marketed as early access on Steam. Games like Anthem, Redfall, Suicide Squad are titles backed by huge AAA publishers with massive marketing budgets, which were implicitly launched as finished titles and priced accordingly. However, your point still stands regarding the potential for early access and now even fully released games to essentially become abandonware in the current market. I hear you. I think this is just also like we're cherry picking the best games on either side to kind of enforce that narrative, right? Like how many indie early access games have failed just as spectacularly as Baldur's Gate has succeeded, right? Like that does still exist, where like we can use Baldur's Gate as a shining example of how early access is done right, but you can point to so many other examples of even trusted studios potentially not delivering on the next expectation. And it's the same with like titles like made by huge AAA publishers. For every Redfall you do have AAA games that actually meet the expectations set by the company and then are delivered upon fully.
It all sucks.
Games are bad, stop playing them. And then we got EIDJ Gaming saying, you describing Anthem as half a decade ago hit me wrong. I know how old it is, but somehow you defining it not as a few years or even as 5 years, but within the major scope of a decade just took the wind out of my sails. I do that intentionally and on purpose because one of the things that I am subtly and quietly trying to revolt against is this idea that you cannot feel old, okay? It's okay for time to pass. It's okay for decades to just whiz on by, and you being old is not a bad thing, okay? Having the experience of life under your belt, living through the experiences you've had is okay. 5 years ago is half a decade. That's how old the GTX 1650 is. That's how old Anthem is. It's what happens. Age gracefully, age with dignity. Time passing is a good thing. It means that you have lived through it. And then we got Cooking with XPS0 saying, when are you going to rotate the other hot news sign? Because one reads NH. I've been wanting to bring this up for a while. It bothers me a little. Okay, I'll give you some deep lore. I've explained this before, but it's been a little bit. Okay, so we got the hot news sign. That's how it's supposed to be. The pink is on the left, the blue is on the right. That is how our logo is. This one, yes, it says NH, but if you notice, the pink is on the left and the blue is on the right, because that's how our logo is. When we got the neon signs made, the company did this one wrong. They got the colors right on the correct side, but they got the letters on the wrong side. So even if I flip it upside down, the problem is the colors are on the wrong letter. The H is supposed to be pink and the N is supposed to be blue, and it's just, even if I rotate it, it's still wrong. So I like hot news, not who's. It's just the way it's always gonna be. It's supposed to bother you. This cost me a decent amount of money and they screwed it up. They gave me the right one for free, so we just utilized both of them. I think it's fun. I don't need to take life seriously, okay? Is hot news serious enough that we can't call it not who sometimes? I don't know. I'm gonna call this episode of Not Who's Done though, because that was a long comment response. I'll see you back here for more of the hottest tech news tomorrow, my friends.